12 gods rule from the top of Mount Olympus. Tonight, you will meet 6 of them. And one of those 6 sits on a throne, the youngest, the last, the throne nearest the door, that used to belong to somebody else. That part of the story is rarely told. It is in the ancient sources, but it is quiet there, almost an afterthought, the kind of detail a poet drops in passing and trusts you to notice. Tonight, you are going to notice it. Tonight, you are walking a slow, unhurried tour through 6 of the 12 thrones, and by the end, you will know which seat changed hands, and why, and what that says about the kind of family the Greeks imagined ruling the world. 6 gods, 6 stories, 1 mountain that, in the oldest sources, has no door at all. Settle in. There is no need to memorize anything. The names will come around when they matter, the way names always do in stories told over centuries. This is a walk, not a list. The kind of slow tour you take through a great cathedral at evening, where the guide pauses at each chapel and tells you a single story before moving on. And by the end of the visit, you understand the place not as architecture, but as somewhere old lives still gather. Mount Olympus stands in northern Greece, in Thessaly. The real mountain is just under 3,000 meters of pale limestone, snow-capped most of the year, and the clouds cover the summit so consistently that you almost never see the top. The Greeks, looking up at that veil of cloud, decided it was hiding a city. They populated the city with 12 gods. They built the city in their imagination so completely that we are still walking through it now, 2,500 years later, in stories like this one. The buildings at the top were made by Hephaestus, the smith god, the lame god, who you will meet tonight. The walls are stone, the foundations are bronze, the pavements of the courtyards are gold, not because gold was rare to the gods, but because it was beautiful. And at this altitude, beauty is the only currency anyone bothers with. There is a great central hall where the 12 gather, and around it, branching off, the smaller palaces of each. The gods eat ambrosia. They drink nectar. The muses sing. Apollo plays the lyre. Conversations move between the immortals the way they have always moved, sometimes gentle, sometimes furious, often both within a single afternoon. And below the mountain, the human world goes on with no idea what is being decided about it. That, then, is the room. We are going to meet 6 of the people in it. Now, take a slow breath and let the room around you go quiet. We are about to walk past the hunter, the warrior, the goddess of love, the smith who suffered, the messenger who plays both sides, and the youngest god of all, the one whose throne, at the end of the row, used to belong to somebody else. Let us start with Artemis. She was the twin sister of Apollo, the god of music and prophecy, and she was born on a small floating island called Delos. The sources almost all agree that she was born first, by some hours or some days, and she helped her mother through the long labor that produced her brother. This is the foundation of one of the strangest aspects of her character. She swore, while still very young, to remain a virgin forever, and yet she became one of the principal goddesses of childbirth, alongside Hera and Eileithyia. She had seen what childbirth was very early. She had decided it was not for her, and she watched over other women going through it for the rest of her divine career. The name Artemis is, almost certainly, not originally Greek. Linguists have spent more than a century arguing about its origin, and the leading guesses involve Persian, pre-Greek, or Anatolian roots. What this means is that the goddess herself is older than the language used to name her. Worship of an Artemis-like figure, a mistress of wild animals, a virgin huntress, a moon goddess, predates the arrival of the Greeks in Greece. The figure was absorbed, refitted, and given a place on Olympus. but the substance of her was already ancient by the time Homer wrote. She lived in the wilderness. She moved with a band of nymphs, all of them sworn to virginity, all of them hunters. She carried a bow made by Hephaestus. She was associated with the moon, though not always. That connection grew stronger in later periods. She was associated with the bear, with the deer, with everything, untamed. The most famous temple to her was at Ephesus, on the western coast of what is now Turkey, and the temple was so vast and so beautifully built that it was counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Her stories are dark. The hunter Actaeon, a young man wandering through the forest with his hounds, came accidentally upon Artemis bathing in a pool with her nymphs. He saw her naked, which mortal men were not permitted to do. The Roman poet Ovid, in the Metamorphoses, is careful to say that Actaeon did not mean to see her. He simply walked into the wrong clearing at the wrong moment. Artemis did not stop to ask. She splashed water at him. The water transformed him into a stag, and his own hunting dogs, no longer recognizing him, ran him down and killed him. Niobe, a queen of Thebes, made the mistake of boasting that she had more children than Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. Niobe had 14 children by the most common count, 7 sons and 7 daughters. Leto only had 2. But the 2, as someone in antiquity dryly put it, were enough. Apollo killed Niobe's 7 sons. Artemis killed her 7 daughters. Niobe wept until she turned to stone, and on a mountain in Anatolia there is a rock formation that looks like a weeping woman, which the Greeks identified as Niobe, still grieving. Her wrath, in the sources, is direct. She does not deliberate. She does not warn. She is the wilderness itself, and the wilderness does not give second chances. And yet, her followers loved her. She was the goddess young women prayed to before marriage, the goddess midwives invoked, the goddess of every transition between one stage of life and the next. She protected. She was fierce, but the fierceness was on your side if you stayed on the right side of her rules. Artemis, then, slim, young, dressed in the short tunic of a huntress, the moon at her shoulder. She does not look at us either. She is listening for something far away. There is a deer somewhere, just beyond the edge of the world, and her bow is half drawn already. Then comes Ares. There is no graceful way to introduce him, so let us be honest. Ares is the least loved of the Olympians. Even Zeus calls him the most hateful of all the gods. That is in the Iliad, Book 5, line 890, and the line is quoted by every Greek writer who came after Homer, and it is delivered by his own father in the middle of an argument, after Ares has run home crying because Diomedes wounded him in battle. Ares was the god of war, but more specifically, he was the god of a particular aspect of war that the Greeks themselves were not entirely comfortable with. He was the god of the battlefield in its rawest form, the rage, the chaos, the bloodlust, the moment when a man stops being a soldier and becomes something less than human. He was not the god of strategy. That was Athena. He was not the god of victory. That was Athena again, mostly. He was the god of the part of war that no one wanted to admit they enjoyed. His mother was Hera. His father was Zeus. He was a legitimate son of Olympus, born within marriage, and despite this, or perhaps because of this, he was treated by the rest of the family with a kind of weary disdain. The Greeks worshipped him, of course. You cannot be a warrior people without honoring the god of war. But they did so without enthusiasm. For the Greeks, he was the embarrassing cousin, the one who showed up at the family banquet bleeding from somewhere and angry about something. Here is what most retellings leave out, though. The Romans, identifying him with Mars, found him essential. They made him the father of Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of the city, which means they made him the ancestor god of Rome itself, co-equal with Jupiter in the Roman imagination, given a month of the year, March, from Mars, and a place at the center of the calendar. The god the Greeks could barely tolerate became, in Latin hands, the founder of an empire. The same god, different city, different century, completely different story. His most famous story is one we have already glanced at. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and the wife of Hephaestus, was carrying on an affair with Ares. The two of them met in Hephaestus's bed when Hephaestus was away, and they thought they were being clever about it. But Helios, the sun, sees everything. And Helios told Hephaestus. Hephaestus, who was the smith god, did what a smith god does. He went to his forge and he made a net. The net was woven from chains so fine they were invisible, finer than spider silk, the Odyssey says, and so strong that not even a god could break them. He hung the net over his bed and pretended to leave for the island of Lemnos. Ares, who had been watching for an opportunity, came at once. The two of them went to bed. The net fell. When Hephaestus called the other gods to come and see, the male gods came. The female gods, the Odyssey tells us with a kind of dry decorum, stayed home out of modesty. Apollo, looking at the trapped pair, asked Hermes whether he would mind being caught in such a net for the chance to lie with golden Aphrodite, and Hermes said he would gladly accept 3 nets that strong, even with all the gods looking on. The gods laughed. Only Poseidon did not laugh. He found the whole thing undignified, and he negotiated Ares's release on the promise of a fine for adultery. It is, in some ways, the most embarrassing scene in Greek mythology. 2 gods caught in a public trap, the whole pantheon laughing. And the laughter is the reframe move. The Greeks did not really respect Ares, even when they invoked him before battle. They feared him, the way you fear something dangerous you have to use. But they did not love him. His throne is bronze and looks heavier than the rest. Ares sits on it in armor. His face is grim. He is, perhaps, the only god in the room who would rather be somewhere else. The strange thing about Aphrodite, the thing the sources almost never agree on, is where she came from in the first place. There are 2 birth myths. They are completely incompatible. Both were told and known and accepted in antiquity, sometimes by the same people, and the Greeks themselves never quite resolved them. Hesiod, in the Theogony, tells the older version. When Cronus castrated his father Uranus and threw the severed genitals into the sea, the foam, Aphros, Greek, gathered around them. The foam grew. A girl coalesced inside it. She drifted on a shell to the island of Cythera, and from there to Cyprus, where she stepped onto dry land. Grass sprang up beneath her feet. Eros, desire, and Himeros, longing, followed her wherever she went. The gods called her Aphrodite, the foam-born, and from that moment she was one of them. Homer, in the Iliad, tells a completely different story. There she is the daughter of Zeus and a titan named Dione, born in the ordinary way, not from foam, not from sea. She is one of Zeus's many children, no older than her sister Athena, no more mysterious than her brother Apollo. Both versions were widely known, both were widely believed, and the philosophical tradition struggled to reconcile them. Plato eventually came up with an elegant solution. There were, he proposed, actually 2 Aphrodites. One was the heavenly Aphrodite, born of foam, older than Zeus, the goddess of higher and more spiritual love. The other was the common Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus and Dione, the goddess of physical and ordinary love. The two were distinct deities who had ended up sharing a name. Plato's solution was clever, but never quite caught on. Most Greeks went on telling whichever version suited the moment. Here is what most retellings leave out, however. The name Aphrodite is almost certainly not originally Greek either. Modern linguists have traced her, with reasonable confidence, back to the Phoenician goddess Astarte, and behind Astarte to the Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar, the same goddess whose worship spread from Babylon across the ancient Near East centuries before the Greeks adopted her. Ishtar was a goddess of love and of war, of fertility and of destruction, of the morning and evening star. By the time the Greeks named her Aphrodite, much of the war had been stripped away, though not all of it. She was still worshipped at Sparta as a goddess of war, and the connection had not been entirely forgotten. The connection between her and the planet Venus is the same connection. The same goddess in different languages, looking down from the same point of light in the western sky. Hesiod's foam etymology, the lovely play on Aphros, was almost certainly a folk explanation grafted onto a name that already existed. The name came first. The story came after, to make sense of the name. Her stories on Olympus are mostly love stories, and most of them go badly. She was married to Hephaestus, the lame god, by Zeus's command, a forced match and an unhappy one. She loved Ares, as we have seen, and that ended in a net. She loved the mortal Adonis, a beautiful young man who was killed by a wild boar, possibly sent by Ares out of jealousy, possibly by Artemis, depending on the source. She loved the Trojan prince Anchises and bore him a son named Aeneas, who would survive the fall of Troy and, according to the Roman tradition, become the ancestor of the Roman people. Through Aeneas, Aphrodite's blood ran in Julius Caesar's veins. The Romans did not forget this. They built the temple of Venus Genetrix in the heart of Rome to honor her as the mother of the Julian line. Her attendants were the three Charites, the Graces, and the three Horae, who guard the gates of Olympus. She wore a magical girdle that made anyone who saw her irresistible. Hera borrowed it once, as you remember. Her throne is rose gold. The doves are at her feet. She smiles when we pass, not because she has noticed us, but because smiling is what her face does when it is at rest. To Aphrodite's left sits her husband, the lame god, the smith. Hephaestus is the only Olympian who works for a living. That is not quite a joke. The other gods are sovereigns, hunters, lovers, warriors. Hephaestus is a craftsman. His domain is the forge, fire, metal, the slow, patient work of making things. He built the palaces of Olympus. He made the thrones the other gods sit on. He made the chariots and the weapons. When Achilles needed new armor during the Trojan War, his mother Thetis went to Hephaestus and asked, and Hephaestus made the most famous shield in literature, the Shield of Achilles, described in roughly 130 lines of the Iliad, with the whole world depicted on it in concentric circles, scenes of farming and dancing and weddings and war. He was lame. Both of his legs were damaged. The sources disagree on how this happened, and the disagreement is, by now, a familiar pattern in Greek mythology. Multiple traditions running in parallel, none of them quite cancelling the others. In the version Homer gives us in the Iliad, there are two falls. The first happened just after his birth. Hera, his mother, was disgusted by his lameness. He was born with the disability in this version, and she threw him from Olympus into the sea below. He fell for 9 days. He was caught by the sea goddesses Thetis and Eurynome, who raised him in a cave under the ocean for 9 years, where he learned the smith's craft and made his first jewelry. The second fall happened later, when he had returned to Olympus. He tried to defend his mother during one of her arguments with Zeus, and Zeus, furious, grabbed him by the foot and threw him from the threshold of heaven. He fell for an entire day this time and landed on the island of Lemnos and was cared for by the people there. Lemnos became his sacred island and the center of his cult. Other sources combine the two falls, or tell only one, or change the order. The mythographer Apollodorus, writing centuries later, mixes the versions in a way that is internally inconsistent. But the inconsistency is the point. The Greeks did not need a single story. They needed the truth the stories pointed at, which was that this god, alone among the Olympians, had suffered. He was disabled. He had been rejected. He worked. His revenge on Hera, in the most famous version of his post-fall story, is one of the strangest sequences in Greek mythology. He returned to Olympus carrying a magnificent gift for his mother, a golden throne, beautifully wrought, the kind of thing only Hephaestus could make. He gave it to her. She sat on it, delighted, and the throne immediately sprang invisible chains around her, and she could not get up. The other gods tried everything, begging, threatening, pulling. The chains held. Eventually Dionysus, the wine god, the latest arrival, who you have not yet met, took it upon himself to solve the problem. He found Hephaestus, befriended him, got him quietly drunk over the course of an evening, and led him back to Olympus on the back of a mule. Hephaestus, by the time he arrived, was in a much better mood. He freed his mother. He was given a place at the table of the gods. He was, in some traditions, given Aphrodite as his wife in the bargain. This is the story that ends with him at the table. It is also the story, when you look at it, again, of a god who was thrown out, returned on his own terms, and was paid in love and family for the suffering he had endured. Whether he ever forgave any of them is a question the sources do not exactly answer. He made the net for Ares. He took the laughter that came with it, and he kept working. His throne is lower than the rest. He is bent over something at his feet, working with his hands. He looks up briefly as we pass. He is the only god who ever notices us. Then comes a god who, on his first day of life, invented a musical instrument and committed grand theft. Hermes was the son of Zeus and a nymph called Maia, and he was born in a cave on Mount Selene in Arcadia. The Homeric hymn to Hermes, our oldest source for his story, probably composed in the 7th or 6th century BC, is the funniest of the Homeric hymns, and it describes his first day as a single comedic sequence: born in the morning, by midday, playing the lyre, by evening, stealing his older brother's cattle. The lyre came first. Hermes, an infant, crawled out of his cradle and immediately spotted a tortoise outside the cave. He picked it up, calling it, the hymn tells us with a kind of straight-faced cruelty, "Lovely plaything," took it back inside, killed it with a knife, and used the shell to invent the world's first stringed instrument. He stretched gut across the shell, fastened it with reed and oxhide, sang a few experimental notes, and then, having satisfied his curiosity about music, he turned his attention to dinner. Apollo's cattle were grazing in Pieria, the next mountain over. Hermes walked there by night, drove 50 of the cows backwards so their hoof prints would face the wrong direction, hid them in a cave, and sacrificed 2 of them to the 12 gods. 2 of them to the 12. The detail is not accidental. By offering a sacrifice to the 12 Olympians, Hermes was making a claim. He was inviting himself in. He was a brand new god, born that morning, and he was already presenting his application for membership. Then he went home and got into bed and pretended to be a baby. When Apollo finally found him, Apollo, who was the god of prophecy, took longer to track down a baby thief than he should have, which is one of the running jokes of the hymn. There was a confrontation. Apollo dragged Hermes before Zeus. Hermes, still pretending to be a newborn, denied everything with such elaborate cleverness that Zeus, instead of punishing him, burst out laughing. That is the reframe move on Hermes. Zeus laughed. Apollo, of course, was furious, but the reconciliation that followed is one of the prettiest scenes in Greek mythology. Hermes brought out the lyre, the one he had made earlier from the tortoise, and played it. Apollo, who had never heard music like this, was so taken with the instrument that he traded the cattle for it on the spot. Hermes got to keep the herd. Apollo got the lyre, which would become his sacred instrument forever after. They became friends. The argument was over. This was Hermes' introduction to Olympus, and it set the pattern for everything else he did. He was the trickster god, the one who could lie and yet somehow remain on everyone's good side, who could steal and yet somehow be trusted. He became the messenger of the gods, the one who carried Zeus's words to mortals, often in disguise. He became the patron of merchants, of travelers, of thieves, of anyone whose work involved crossing boundaries. And most importantly, he became the psychopomp, the guide of souls, the one who escorted the dead from the world above to the underworld. The same boundary crossing that allowed him to slip between gods and mortals allowed him to slip between life and death. When you died, in the Greek imagination, Hermes was waiting at the edge of the road, ready to take your hand and lead you down. He carried a staff called the Kerykeion, the Romans would call it the caduceus, a winged staff with 2 snakes twined around it. It is, in modern times, often confused with the rod of Asclepius, which has only 1 snake and is the actual symbol of medicine. The two are commonly mixed up on hospital signs. The mistake is harmless, and Hermes, the god of confusing one thing for another, would probably appreciate it. He wore winged sandals, made by Hephaestus. He could move faster than any other god. He was, by general agreement, the most genuinely likable Olympian, the one you might actually want to have a drink with, the one whose tricks always turned out to be in service of something larger. His throne is small and somehow almost casual. Hermes is half leaning on it, 1 foot up, as if he might leave at any moment. He winks at us as we pass. He is the only god who acknowledges us at all. And now we come to the throne nearest the door, the last of the 12, the one I told you to remember at the very beginning, when we first walked into this hall, Dionysus. Dionysus was, in many traditions, the latest god to arrive on Olympus. He was a foreigner. His worship came into Greece from somewhere else, probably from Phrygia or Thrace, north and east of the Greek world, and it came in late, after the canon of the older gods had already been set. By the time the Greeks decided how many seats there were at the divine table, the table was already full. 12 was the number. 12 was the number that had become traditional. 12 months in the year, 12 gods at the great altar of the 12 at Athens, 12 chairs set out for the great festivals. There was no room. In the version of the story that survives most clearly, the goddess Hestia, Zeus's eldest sister, the goddess of the hearth, gave up her throne. Hestia was the quietest of the gods. She did not have the dramatic stories of the others. She did not marry. She did not fight. She tended the central fire of Olympus, the fire that was the heart of every Greek household by analogy. And when Dionysus arrived, and there was no chair for him, she stood up and offered hers, and went to sit by the hearth. She is still there, in the versions that include her at all. She is just not on the throne anymore. It is one of the quietest moments in the whole pantheon. And if you have ever been the person who stood up so somebody else could sit down, you know exactly what that gesture costs, and exactly what it gives. Not all sources tell it this way. Some include Hestia and exclude Dionysus. Some include both and leave out someone else. The Roman canon, the De Consentes, kept Hestia under the name Vesta because the Roman state had its own reasons for needing her. There is, as the scholars who study this admit openly, no single canonical list of the 12. The list shifted over time. It varied by city. It varied by century. The number was fixed. The membership was negotiable. But in the version this story is following, the version that remembers the change, the youngest god is Dionysus, and the throne he sits on used to belong to his aunt. His birth is the strangest of any Olympian. His mother was Semele, a princess of Thebes who was a mortal woman. She was loved by Zeus. Hera, finding out, came to her in disguise. The disguise was either an old woman or a friend, the sources vary, and persuaded her to ask Zeus to appear before her in his full divine form. Semele asked. Zeus, who had sworn an oath he could not break, agreed. He appeared in his glory, and the lightning, the same lightning that had killed Titans in their war, incinerated her. But the child she was carrying was half divine, and the lightning could not kill it. Zeus reached into the fire, took the unborn fetus from his dying lover's body, and sewed it into his own thigh. Some months later, the thigh opened, and Dionysus was born. Born, that is, twice. From Semele, premature, and from Zeus, complete. The Greeks called him Dithyrambus, the twice-born, and the title became, in time, a name for the kind of choral hymn that was sung in his worship. Hermes carried the infant to a place called Nysa, which the Greeks could not quite locate on a map, but knew was somewhere far to the east. The nymphs of Nysa raised him. He grew up there and learned, somehow, to ferment grapes into wine, and as he grew, he gathered a band of followers, women who became known as the Maenads, men who became satyrs, the whole strange retinue of the Dionysian cult. And he traveled the Eastern world teaching the rites of wine. Then he came back to Greece. The story of his return is told most powerfully in the Bacchae, the last play of Euripides, written around 405 BC. In the play, Dionysus comes home to Thebes, the city of his mother, and is denied. The young king Pentheus, Semele's nephew, refuses to allow the new worship in. Dionysus, with very little visible effort, undoes him. The women of the city are driven into the mountains, in a state of religious madness. Pentheus follows, trying to watch what should not be watched. He does not come back. The truth of what has happened reaches his mother last of all, and the play ends in the slow arrival of a grief no one in the story will recover from. It is, in the end, a story about what a city pays when it refuses the new god at the door. This is the god on the 12th throne. The god who arrived late. The god who taught the Greeks how to drink wine and how to lose themselves in the rites that wine sometimes makes possible. The god of the theatre. Every Greek tragedy and comedy was performed at his festival. The city Dionysia, in the great theatre on the southern slope of the Acropolis. And the god, in some sense, of the kind of joy that requires breaking the boundaries the other gods spent their time defending. He is also, in the strangest way, a god of resurrection. His own birth was a kind of return from death. His worship, in some places, included rites that involved a god's death and rebirth, which is part of why early Christian writers were unsettled by the obvious parallels. The Greeks did not see those parallels, of course. They had Dionysus first. He is the youngest. He is the latest. He is the one whose rites bursts the rules. And his throne, the 12th one, the one nearest the door, the one Hestia gave him, sits at the end of the row, exactly where you would expect the youngest in a family to sit at a long dinner. That, then, is the tour. 6 thrones, 6 gods, one mountain whose summit, even now, is hidden by clouds for most of the year. 6 gods, and one of them, The youngest, on the throne nearest the door, sits on a seat that used to belong to somebody else. We learned her name as we walked. Hestia, the eldest sister, the one who tended the central fire and gave up her chair when the latecomer arrived. That is the empty seat the tour began with, and it has not been empty for a long time, only changed hands. You are at the door now. The Horae are about to roll the cloud back. The walk is almost over. Rest now. You do not have to hold any of it. The names will come back when you need them, the way names do. Artemis and Ares, Aphrodite and Hephaestus, Hermes and Dionysus. 6 syllables, 6 thrones, 6 old presences in a long colonnade you have just visited and are now leaving. The cloud is closing behind you. If this story found you at the right moment, if it gave you something to take into sleep with you, or something to leave at the door, you might consider subscribing to Sleepable Mythology. There are more of these waiting, more gods, more mountains, more truths older than any of us. We will be telling them gently on every day that the world keeps turning, which is to say all of them. 6 more gods are also waiting in this same hall. The king who swallowed his first wife to keep his throne, the sister queen who once tricked him on a mountain, the brother who lost a city to a tree, the mother who taught a civilization what to do with grief, the goddess who stepped fully grown and armed from her father's head, and the god of music and prophecy who took an oracle from the earth. Their stories are on the channel as their own tour whenever you are ready for them. Next, Hades, the brother who drew the 3rd lot, the king of the place no one comes back from, and the only one of the great Olympians whose throne is not on this mountain at all. Good night.